I love how we're just always jamming coming in,
We are, folks. We are dancing in the background. Really,
like
do you really? I
clubbing
really want
as
to
we
know.
come into the show.
That's right. Can you believe, Sharon? We're at episode 19.
Nice.
Yeah,
Good
19
progress.
consecutive Mondays. That here we are.
Woohoo. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, good morning and welcome to the latest episode of the Project Failure Files. This series is for anyone who manages projects for a living, whether it's a project manager, program manager, product manager, group manager, operations manager, or maybe you own your own business, you wear all the hats. This weekly series is for you. I'm Sharon Weaver, CEO of Smarter Consulting.
And I am Christian Buckley, founder of Collab Talk. And welcome to another episode, the 19th episode of our series where Sharon and I explore project management topics from the perspective of what not to do as you manage projects. In each episode of the Project Failure Files, we'll talk about the common pitfalls, sharing personal stories and experiences, and explore strategies and best practices to help you. We have all the catchphrases here, Sharon, but to help you to be successful.
Well, in this episode, we are going to talk about a problem that happens in many organizations beyond numbers, the significance of metrics.
I like to think of this as the mistake of being, overly reliant on the numbers and sometimes ignoring, what is right in front of you. I call this management by spreadsheet.
Yeah, and the problem is that sometimes numbers don't really tell you or give you the whole story or the big picture.
I have stories to tell around that. You're exactly right. I'm looking forward to this topic, Sharon. And as with every episode, please feel free to comment throughout the episode and share your experiences and any great examples or feedback that we may have missed.
Okay, let's get started with some of the core project management metrics.
Well, think about this. We've talked about in past episodes, Sharon, around like the concept of the stand-up meeting. And so when you were trying to, and we talked about why we brought that up was trying to make a cultural change. And it was often a painful change to get an organization to better adhere to a process. And one of the key parts of making that meeting work, when I've done that in multiple companies, this goes back to, remember the first time I employed that tactic was back in 2002, 2003. Working with a client, I think it was 2003, like it was in 2004, maybe. I was working with Hewlett Packard. But doing basic metrics around tracking of projects. And it was very simple. It was, here's a list of the projects, the priority of those projects, who the owner, the stakeholder was, or the multiple stakeholders, the main executive sponsor of that, the estimated delivery date of that project, and then the resources that were the people that were working on that project. That was it. But it was part of the daily 15-20 minute stand-up meeting. People hated it because it was always like first thing in the morning, but it was about keeping people tracking what exactly is being worked on and making it easier to chase the people who were going off and working on things that were not a priority, but also forcing people who were coming in with new requests to also adhere to the process, because otherwise people were getting pulled in multiple directions. And so that basic set of metrics, of data points around the projects, that core is so critical to have that centrally managed, visible, transparent of the process, so that everyone has the same view of what's going on.
Yeah, I definitely think early on, most of the project management stuff that I was working on or part of was heavily around resource management, how many hours, what was completed, number of tasks, number of subtasks. And then, and I worked in a lot of software development shops. So then that would break down into how many chunks of code, were ready to be integrated, ready to be deployed, things like that, like number of reports that we would be working on, because we did a lot of custom reporting. So how many reports do we have to do? But it all came down to like number of tasks, number of resources, number of hours, things like that. I think as I progressed into more agile shops, then we started having the talk about, we started talking about estimates and burn down charts, and it changed. Like, it changed the way that I thought about what metrics we were gathering and how it mattered to people. I think we think about the core of what metrics exist in project management. I find that the two big ones are really, like tasks and hours, and then resource metrics, like how many people do you have, how many hours are they working, how much are they delivering, things like that. I think that's probably the biggest ones.
Well, two are so you even kind of separated there. You're talking about the actual data around tracking, like the metrics around project health, and that's the task. It's the Gantt chart. It's the where are we on this schedule, and then as part of that, to then you get better insights into the people that are actually completing those tasks, and are we wisely managing our resources? Are we, under or overutilizing certain personnel, certain things that are out there? But then there's the other half of metrics, which is sometimes it's the reporting, the above and beyond the project management tracking tasks. But is this the right data to, I guess it kind of fits into the overall project health, but it's more the portfolio view of that helps
Exactly.
the stakeholders make management decisions around the project. That's, and sometimes, like, I'm a fan of, I've always talked about like the 4 blocker method of just something that's very high level, so that you've got the first quadrant, we know the scope, it's not changed, here's what's going on. The next quadrant is what was delivered. So we run down of what happened in the last week, the last 2 weeks, whatever it is, for the cadence of those review sessions. Then what the risks are, the opportunities that come out of that. It's kind of a SWOT analysis, a little bit different. And then what's next? What are we going to go and do, which includes mitigation of risks that were identified. But that's something where, I've worked with multiple companies where the leadership team is like, that's what I care about, because I want to know specifically, what are your asks? Like, I can go read a chart that tells me the status of the project. If everything's moving along, great. Then we don't need to have this meeting. It's like, we should all be checking the status of the reporting. And Sharon, how often do people go in and read on their own the project status to know whether that you need to meet and
every
discuss?
every single time.
Oh yeah, all the people all the time.
No, I
Yeah,
think you're right. I think the people who are working, like typically the delivery team cares more about the scope and the resources and the task. But then once you get up to the stakeholder level, I do think they care more about the risks, the issues, the budget. So is there anything that's causing any issues? Are there things we need to be aware of? And budget, what the interesting part about budget is budget never really comes up except for when we start talking about
when you
risks and
slip,
issues.
when it
A lot of
slips.
times,
Right.
no news is good news. We don't need to talk about budget unless there's a problem with the budget, right?
Well, that's my philosophy with a lot of the metrics around project management, is that, if they're like, we should only be discussing the exceptions. We should only, because everybody has eyes, everybody should be making the time to go and review, like, what's next. Like, I've worked with really great PMs that did a great job of managing up to the, the directors, the VPs, like up the chain, to make sure that their questions were answered. But that, again, that gets into it didn't change what's being tracked on the health of the project. It was more about, hey, these risks, we have a plan in place if this happens, or hey, there's an update, this has happened. You're managing to the exceptions. You're involving people when discussion needs to happen, where decisions need to be made around the future of the project, because something has not gone to plan. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
the other side to this too, Sharon, is that there is danger of focusing on the wrong metrics, and it's, as we kind of mentioned it during the intro, I've worked on projects where they were so focused on the wrong metrics. Case in point, I had a co-founder of a client company that we redesigned the website, and conversions almost uh, doubled. Like, just it was a huge increase in conversion activity. So that's when somebody downloads something, fills out a form, buys something, whatever those different conversion activities that you have on the website. But this CIO was, or sorry, COO was overly concerned the fact that the number of unique visitors to the website dropped. So we made it more targeted. We made it, it was overall better, but we had fewer people that were going to the site, and yet the conversion number doubled. So we were getting fewer but higher quality visitors. But all he complained about every single meeting was, how do we get the number of unique visitors back up? It's like, look, we've got a bunch of strategies for that, but all of our efforts are around the conversion activities, the fact that we're selling more product. The guy still complained about the number of users. I said, yeah, but we're just, all of the marketing around it, all of the efforts are driving the right people to the site versus more people to the site. So that's an example of focusing on the wrong metrics. I don't know if you've got an example, share
Yeah.
something that
A while
comes to
back,
mind.
yeah, early in my career, we made this like big project board that basically had statuses for every single project that we worked on, and it was like an overall portfolio view. And it was really interesting because all that the leadership really wanted to see was the KPIs around every single project. I want to know what the status is. Is it healthy? Is it not healthy? If it's healthy, I don't want to worry about it, right? If it's green, I don't worry about it. But if it's yellow or red, then I care. And that allowed them to very quickly at a glance see every single project and see the status of it. And the one thing I remember us talking about was that that was a great idea, as long as every single project was consistently updated and they were very clear on defining what was green, yellow, and red. And I know that, there was some struggle for a while about defining what those were, because when we first put it up, it's like everything was green. And we were like, I just remember us talking about the fact that like all the projects can't be green. That's not real. And so I think what that actually, it kind of went the other way, right? Is because they were really struggling with kind of knowing what was going on with the projects. They're like, everything's green all the time. By seeing it all in one place, it's like, okay, this is not real data. Like something's wrong. It needs to have variance in it. And there was no variance in it. So I think when we think about how you look at things, um, if you see that data and you're just looking at it at the surface, right? You just see that surface data. And to your point, it doesn't tell you the whole story. It doesn't tell you what's happening behind the scenes. It just kind of gives you it kind of gives you maybe a little bit of a false sense of security, because you're like, I see the data, I looked at it, I didn't find out any more information about it, I know the whole picture. And that's not always true. Sometimes you have to see more information or dig a little deeper to see a pattern, to understand one project in itself as green is perfectly fine if that's real. But when you look at 50 or 100 projects and they're all green, then all of a sudden, maybe those metrics aren't as good as you thought they were.
I always say, Sharon, in fact, I know I said this last week, probably the last 2 weeks. I say this a lot. It's like, but one of the worst parts of being a project manager is chasing people for status, of tasks of whatever it is. And one of the huge failures, and I've been through this so many different times, um, working with clients, working in large companies, where they were really interested. Somebody higher up was very passionate about, like, we need to get better analytics around how we're running our projects. We want to make this a core strength that we're going to be able to go in and we talk about this like with change management and organizations that are good at change management, good at project management, have a distinct competitive advantage over those that are not good at that. You're able to more quickly identify issues and then mitigate that, plan for that, move forward with that. New technology comes out much quicker to turn that around. Well, ideally, we have a good idea. So going back to measuring the way that we're running projects today, uh, and capturing data and getting analytics around how much on average are we spending around these types of tasks. Okay, we have another project that is 90% similar to this other project we just finished. So therefore, and this comes into play with writing like a scope of work. So scoping out projects. Um, but the reality is that going and tracking that out actual information. Here's how painful that process is. Here's an example. I remember going and having a conversation with somebody, and this just stands out. Like early in my career, and going and talk to them and said, "All right, so the status report for last week was that you were 80% done with this task that would take, 12 days to do the X number of hours, per day to go and do. All right, here we are a week later. It's still not marked as done. You've blown past the window of the time that you thought it would take. Oh yeah, I'm like 85% done. It it's like when you're downloading software and it says, "All right, you're 95% there, and you're still 95% there." And then, "Oh, now you're 93% there. Oh, now it's 97. No, it's back to 90% there." So there's no trust at all. And all they do is they put the little timer on there just to show you some numbers so that you don't complain. You feel like progress is being made. That's kind of like a lot of project status. It's not a lot of PMs won't then make the effort to go in there with that individual and expand. Okay, how many hours do you think it'll take to finish this task? All right, so you're actually at this percent and that it is slipped. I mean, kind of doing that level of granularity of metrics. However, that's what you need to do to really truly understand, are we just bad at estimating this? Did problems happen that it slipped? Or is somebody just throwing in a number and not being honest about the actual time that it's taking? So all of those things, all of those conversations are likely happening inside your organization. So you have to look at that effort to build a standardized approach to your project management with a grain of salt.
I think one of my favorite stories around this topic is that when I was a project manager at a software development company, they paid to bring in a trainer, and we did a full 2-day training on how to estimate properly. And it's probably one of the best investments I've ever seen a place make into their team, because you don't think about, oh, wait, that's a training. But they came in and they did a full 2-day workshop on how to estimate properly. And this is where, I mean, and you can do this in a formal waterfall methodology as well, but this is where I think Agile really kind of has an edge, is the idea is really to break every single thing you down into the absolute smallest trackable part so that your estimates get as tight as humanly possible. If everything is broken down into its smallest common denominator to a place where you feel comfortable estimating it, because we can't estimating a 1-year, 2-year, 3-year project. Like, come on, guys, we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen in 3 months. Estimating a couple months project gets a little easier. Estimating a couple days project gets even easier. But if I say to you, let's talk about a task that you can do in a couple of hours, estimating gets really, really easy. So breaking that down to the smallest common denominator makes a big difference. And I think that particular training is probably one of the most favorite I did, because it allows you to more accurately estimate. And then because of that, more accurately track what you're doing, so that when you're putting it in, then when you're trying to do burn down, or you're trying to, be like, okay, how much do people actually get done for every segment that they've now marked that it's complete, it really is actually complete. And to your point, it's not a weird number that somebody's making up. I think I'm most of the way through my project. It's I finished this piece, and so I can honestly say I'm this far complete.
Yeah. Well, I think last week or the week before I compared it to how car mechanics are so good at that, and they're able to go in and usually very accurately say, well, this part, and they've got published guidelines that people that are trained on certain types of vehicles, they'll open that up. Like I drive an Audi, and something like an Audi this year, this fix, it takes these parts, it takes this time. It already has built into that estimate the time that I've got to take out all these other pieces to get to that part. And so the estimated labor is 4 hours. Here's our hourly rate. Here's the parts of that. And they have a pretty good estimate of those things. You always have to ask also to throw in and with tax on top of whatever taxes there are to get the accurate number. But they're fairly close, because they were able to go do that. Every organization wants that level of accuracy. But to your point, something that's longer than a week or two, it's really hard to go in and do that. So most tracking, that is that you've got your best estimate, or one of my favorite words, guesstimate, your professional guesstimate, is on just tracking that progress, identifying issues, and then updating the plan. So this is so I think of most metrics more as a communication tool, and it's more in real time, like, hey, the best the best view of the project and what the actual numbers are at the end of the project, looking back at that, and so tracking as accurate as possible, but using it more as a common language for communicating with your various stakeholders out there. Here's the work that needs to be done. Here's what we just added. Here's what changed. Here's what our estimate is. What I hate is when you have leaders that are like, you told me this would take 2 weeks. Said, yeah, that was before half of our the scope got blown out of the water by decisions that you approved that changed all this. Like, nothing is worse than being a consultant, is that scope creep where they've added things in, and yet they're still trying to hold you to the timeline of the original estimate before they blew it out with all the additional requests.
Or even worse, and I'm going to say this out loud because I know somebody's listening to this right now and being like, well, that'd be nice if nothing ever changed. And many of us work, especially, we work in modern work in the cloud, and we don't have as much control over things as we used to. Things change literally every single day. We have potential outages, we have potential issues, we have, things that we don't know are going to happen sometimes. And so I do think, there is, and we bake in contingency for some of that. But I will say out loud that, part of the struggle, I think, too, is, have we taken into account the things that might change during the scope of the project, especially, we work a lot in cutting edge technology. And so we'll say, based on what we know about this today, here's what our estimate is. And I do think it's a mixture of, a lot of times in consulting, clients they don't know what they don't know, right? They don't understand things. And so a lot of times they will ask for other things, or they'll change things, along the way. But also the technology has the potential to change, especially for a longer project, which is why I see shorter projects and shorter projects and shorter projects. But I think we just don't know what we don't know sometimes.
That's another reason why I love recording those meetings and having, as part of the having that audit trail of, and I do this with most of my clients too, is where we have, I timestamp, I put a date on, and versions of, status notes, those meeting notes, so that I can go back and say, like, look, this was discussed and we talked about this change. You approved it then. I mean, back in the day, before a lot of these collaboration tools, I learned this lesson from being burned early on. So in the early to mid 90s, I started doing the CYA emails. This is what I heard you ask for out of this meeting. If you'll approve this, I use this as a change control. and so a PCR, a project change request,
Yep.
and we've documented and go back. Because I have had too many times, Sharon, and I'm sure you've done the same thing, where they're like, I never asked for that. Actually, here's the email where you
Yeah.
specifically asked for this. I told you the impact. You approved it. Here we are.
In fact, when I teach elicitation for business analysts, one of the comments I always tell them is, no matter what happens, get it in writing. If you're trying to get acceptance, if you're trying to deal with change, if there's going to be something that's going to be different than what you expected or wrote down originally, I don't care if you have to get it on a napkin. I don't care if they write it on your T-shirt. Like, make sure it's in writing.
Yeah, I mean, email is pretty acceptable now. It didn't
Yeah.
used to be. And so I would do
Yeah.
the same thing where I would say, here's the PCR, and it required a signature. I mean, that's how I learned back in the 3-ring binders for all your documentation days, was getting physical signatures. And some people would push back, like, I'm not going to sign that. I said, well, then I'm not going to do that. Here's my plan of record. If I don't have a signature on this
Yeah.
change, where it's coming from, I said, I'm not authorized to go and do that. And I actually, as part of my process, that methodology, was told them all changes requiring that impact budget, timeline, resources must have a signature and must be from one of these approval authorities, stakeholders, out there. So if I had a junior person for that department showing up to our project meeting, and they're like, oh, we want this change. I'm like, all right, we need this signature. Like, you're not authorized. You need to go get the director who's asking for this. Like, this was agreed to up front. It's great when you have that structure. And as I say repeatedly, like you do too, it's like, I don't care what methodology, what framework, have one, follow that.
Yes.
That
Yes.
then allows you to go and be clinical in your approach to how you respond to these things. To say, like, sorry, this, when I say clinical, like using doctor language, like, hey, I'm sorry, this project has cancer. Here's what it is. Here's how we mitigate. This is what we're going to do moving forward. It's difficult to have those conversations when you don't have the structure, that framework for communication.
So,
Yeah.
so traveling down the road to meaningful metrics.
Yeah.
One of the things I think about in this conversation is, the idea of using the right thing for the right conversation at the right time. And when we think about metrics, a lot of times people think, oh, well, it has to be this or it has to be that. And one of the things that comes to mind in this particular conversation is something like a requirements traceability spreadsheet. And so we always think, oh, well, it has to be this type of a tool to be a meaningful metric. It has to do this thing. And when I think about, what are impactful metrics, what are meaningful metrics that actually make a difference, where people can see, information,
Actual progress.
Actual
not
progress.
that false sense of progress that distract from what are we actually trying to accomplish? What is the business trying to achieve? So, like, even looking at, like, I always hated the percentage of tasks that are completed. Who cares? if a bunch of the setup, like, it's irrelevant to whether we actually deliver or not, because the hardest stuff is probably in the last 20%. It's the 80-20 rule, always the 80-20
Yes.
rule.
Yeah. No, I just think it's good to have tools, and I think it's good to have deliverables and reports that make sense, that everybody can see, that tell us what we need to know about what's going on. And I think a lot of times people default to specific types of reports and specific types of metrics because that's the way they've always done it, or that's what certain people do, or that's what they knew at their last job, as opposed to being like, okay, what are the metrics that actually are going to help us decide and do things that we need to do.
Right. Well, I think that's the key, is like, if you're focused on what is the actual business outcome of this project, and being able to show that we're achieving those business outcomes. And so that might be that, hey, look, we have I mean, yeah, the project has a beginning, middle, and an end, that we're delivering a system. Well, the business outcome is, with that new system, we're able to double the amount of output. So the measurement of the project really is doubling the amount of output. and you might be able to start showing at early phases of deploying the technology, moving forward on the project, that you're starting to improve on those metrics and show that progress. It's again, I go back and I say that, like, the number one reason for the metrics is it's a communication tool. So if in your communication, your goal, because you can have a perfectly deployed, we were on time, on budget, perfectly deployed a system, but then that nobody uses it, it never achieved the business outcomes. Guess what? Your perfectly deployed project that did exactly what you said was a failure
Mhm.
because you failed to tie it to the actual meaningful metrics. Like,
Yeah.
that's my main point here.
No, I agree. I absolutely agree. I think that, um, you can absolutely, and this goes back to the conversation of you can make data whatever you want it to be, right? It's about, is it meaningful? Does it make sense? Does it tell a story? Does it answer a question? And so I think, this goes back to the idea of what story are you trying to tell? What questions are you trying to answer? Who are you trying to share that information with to make a difference? Depending on who's looking at it, they're going to have different needs around how they see those metrics and how you tell that story. So I 100% agree with you. I mean, I think it's not about just having it, it's not about just doing it, it's not about, we have metrics, we have reports, that should be enough. It's about what story you're trying to tell and what questions are you trying to answer and who are you trying to do that for. Then work with them to make sure that the metrics that you're gathering, the information you're gathering, is truly solving the problem, answering the question, helping them to decide, do I need to join the meeting? Do I not need to join the meeting? Is there something that I need to do as an executive, at a risk and issues level that maybe I didn't realize had I not seen that, the button was red on the KPI?
Yeah. There's so much more that we can get into and talk about this topic. I mean, but I think that identifying what are the right metrics should be part of the conversation at the beginning, to say, look, at the end of the day, I used to always use a phrase like, what does success look like? What are we actually trying to do? And so this project might be a combination of smaller projects that work towards and achieve that goal. But I think you need to make sure you have that alignment of however you're measuring, how you're tracking those things with those business objectives. Make sure that the leadership, because it's all about communication up to the owners of that project. Where are we? What's the right status? What's the right information that you need to see to show that we're delivering against that business objective? I think that's not trying to overly simplify it for time, but I am trying to streamline it for time.
No, it's 100% right. It's the whole, numbers are numbers. But as long as you're delivering an outcome and you're focused on a goal as a team, then I think, the metrics are there to support you, not to define you.
Yeah. Well, I'd say that my kind of final practical steps are my practical tips for implementing the most effective metrics. So one, it needs to be a conversation. You need to involve your stakeholders and say, here's what it is. Here's what we're actually driving towards. We're going to do all these second level, the Gantt charts, the project time, like look at all these efficiencies, but the real goal is this. This is what we're trying to do. This is why we're doing this project. Again, I think with an IT perspective, but trying to keep those as simple and relevant as possible. We'll leverage technology where we can to track those things. Sometimes you have to do here's how, a translation, a transformation of these technical tracking into here's what it actually means for the business. But that should be something, as far as the continual process of looking at, the metrics. Learn from these, the mistakes that are made, and learn from, hey, we've spent all this time tracking tasks and all this level of detail, but it never told us what we're actually trying to do. Like, have those kinds of open conversations so that you improve over time and get better at understanding, hey, we don't need to spend as much time building up reports that no one's looking at, they're glancing at, where really they just want this. That's how I personally got to the whole 4-blocker method, because it's super simple, it's straightforward. People know, here's where we are, here's where we're going next, here's what you need me to take action on, me, the stakeholder. So keep it simple keep it simple, stupid is a great phrase. So I don't know, any other final thoughts here before we wrap?
I mean, really, like we said before, just make sure that you're aligning your metrics to your actual goals. Don't do metrics just for the sake of metrics, and make sure that they make sense and that they're solving an actual problem and answering an actual question. But other than that, I mean, I think metrics are good. Just make sure that they're solving your problem and helping you to be successful.
Yeah. Well, I like what you said at the beginning. Don't just do something because it's always the way that we've done it. Every single project, you should look at it with a fresh pair of eyes and say, like, hey, does this make sense, or do we need to make a change here? That's how change happens.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Sharon, really appreciate your time. Of course, everybody who joined us. That's it for this week's episode. Please be sure to follow us and subscribe. And I've been so lax on the banners here. Of course, here's where you can find us. See, we're so caught up in the conversation. Yeah, there it is. That's where you can follow Sharon and I. Of course, we're back every Monday. You can find all the past episodes. I mean, this one will be live in the next 15, 20 minutes out there. It's already out there live, but you'll be able to find it out on the blog. And then, of course, we also have a conversation out on Facebook, a community, so you can join there. And with that, I think that's it.
That's it for today.
Yeah. So we'll see you next Monday at 9 a.m. Pacific, as with every Monday. So thanks a lot, everybody.
See you next week.
Yes, I want to know.